Increasingly, bureaucratic and technocratic elites cling to power by way of technological control mechanisms. Thankfully, governments don't shoot protesters in the streets anymore, at least not in democracies. We should not forget that. But we may have a new problem. A very problematic law came into force. It has come into force already last year, but it truly came into force, forced companies to follow it a few weeks ago in the European Union. Potentially, it's detrimental to democracy and free speech. I wasn't quite aware that this was in the pipeline, but apparently it was. It is the Digital Services Act, so-called DSA, which aims to quash illegal content, hate speech, and disinformation. Well, the former two are quite understandable, of course. It is the latter one that is problematic. I mean, who is to decide what is disinformation? Well, according to the EU big shots, it's a permanent European Commission task force on disinformation, which is to be funded by large online platforms like Google, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. There is an interesting topical parallel thing happening in the United States right now, but that seems to be going in a different direction. Those of you who have checked out the episode with Professor Jay Bhattacharya on the podcast, you know that there's a lawsuit underway, Missouri v. Biden, in which the plaintiffs claim that the Biden administration has violated the First Amendment by coercing online platforms to remove content that was critical towards the official harsh COVID-19 policies. Now, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has made a preliminary injunction against the government, entailing that the government should not be allowed to pressure companies to censor. Meaning, yes, the government did actually violate the First Amendment. On this side of the pond, so to speak, on this side of the Atlantic, it seems as if the European Union wants to ensure the right to block content that is deemed unsafe for the public, the citizens. Washington actually attempted to do something similar that the European Union is doing now with that task force. I think it was last spring, but they had to backpedal because of too much criticism. There is a real risk that that task force, European Union task force, begins to act in a way that might be defined as censorship. I hope that free-thinking and free-feeling people will react if that happens. These top moves towards censorship, I'm not saying that it is actually happening, that they are censoring, but these are moves towards censorship. They are related to the media landscape, the media climate. I've discussed with my friend and podcast colleague, Per Shapiro, episode coming up soon, whether the standard news media today is less open to alternative ideas than a few decades ago. Per thinks so. I have hesitated, but I've come to the conclusion that he might be right. I mean, I have, after all, myself had 30 years of first-hand experience of the media mentality. So I think that it was probably a bit more feasible to persuade an editor to publish a contrarian view on a contentious issue, say 20 or 30 years ago, than it is today. But I have a theory of my own as to why this has happened. My hypothesis is that the more the alternative sources of information have mushroomed and people have begun to think for themselves, the more the establishment, including leading media, I mean, they're all dancing the same dance, politicians, journalists, they feel a need to defend their mainstream or approved, if you will, worldview. When there were no real contenders to big media, no player in the information field, so to speak, that could truly threaten the standard stories, there was no need to clamp down on outlier opinions there was wiggle room for the establishment. There was room, as it were, to come across as open-minded and fair. They weren't threatened. But today, big media and the standard or approved stories of the establishment, they're threatened from all sides, really, and hence the need for correction in the ranks and the need to delineate what is acceptable. That's what I think. What do you think?